Good morning, RWorld. Welcome back to another episode of RWorld Talk. This morning, we've got a special treat for you. We are with Abagail Hasebroock from the Sun Sentinel, the South Florida Sun Sentinel. You are a Palm Beach County reporter. Welcome, Abigail. Thanks for being with us this morning.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
So why don't we kick it off with some questions about the Sun? So the Sun Sentinel does a great job covering everything real estate, as most of our listeners know. What is your news cycle process like? Like, how do these stories get birthed?
Yeah, of course. So we publish a print newspaper every single day, but then we're constantly updating on our site and social media with obviously lots of different content. As far as real estate stories go, there's a wealth of data and information that comes out that's real estate related that we're constantly combing through. Some of it may be a piece of a story, some of it might end up being an entire story in of itself. And so having that constant flux of data helps us to shape and figure out, okay, what trend is happening? Are we going to just update our readers? Are we going to notify them of a new trend? The thing about real estate stories that's so important is that this impacts people's lives, right? So
Sure.
you need a place to live, whether you're renting, whether you're going to buy, whether you're a current home buyer and you're paying off your mortgage. And so these stories carry a lot of impact and they carry great interest. They're one of our most highly read stories. And I think that makes sense, right? Because people need to know about where they want to live, what hot spots are maybe more expensive, what areas are, I mean, everywhere in South Florida is expensive, but maybe what areas are a little bit more realistic for them to be living. Maybe they're single, maybe they're in a family. So kind of taking in all those factors, and we're trying to help be the guiding force in that. And that's kind of how we decide to come up with those stories. And readers have been very receptive to all of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're constantly combing through the data. It's not that you're waiting for a press release to come out for a story to go and run with. These are things that you guys are actually working on a consistent basis to find out where the trends are, where things are moving, where people may be moving. I mean, we do see a lot of trends of people that are moving from Miami and starting to head north looking for more affordable housing. So those are the kinds of things that you guys cover for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And even we did a story once about eviction rates.
Okay.
We found that there were some areas where evictions were a lot higher than others.
Interesting.
So sometimes we kind of go that route too to see, okay, this data is saying this. It's a little bit different than what we're normally looking at. What does that tell us about these areas and perhaps what resources may be needed? And then maybe we'll talk to municipalities to see if that's coinciding as well. So we're kind of open to anything. And a lot of times, usually some form of real estate data has a place somewhere, we've
Sure.
found.
Well, I know that you reach out to us here at RWorld looking for the newest data and the newest trends and get our opinion. We thank you for that. So that way you're getting things from a good source, obviously. Why don't you tell us about your start? How did you get started in journalism? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So I've always loved to write. I've always been a writer since I was very little. I didn't really enter journalism and fall in love with that until I decided to major in it at the University of Florida. And that was where I fell in love with it. That was where I learned that not only is it about writing, but it's about talking to people. It's about learning people's stories. It's about having the privilege and honor to tell those stories, whether it's about real estate, whether it's about, someone's life. And I've gotten to meet so many cool and interesting people, some of them famous, getting to go on adventures to different places. And it really is one of the coolest jobs in the world. Of course, I would think that. But it just allows you to learn about so many different things. I don't think when I was at UF, I would have thought I would have written a lot about real estate or know as much as I do now about real estate or a lot of other topics for that matter. But it's cool because it really allows me to just learn something new every day, literally. And it helps me sometimes too, as someone who lives here in South Florida, I can learn and keep up on those trends as well. So yeah, that's sort of how I got my start and how I stayed.
Well, you mentioned University of Florida a couple of times, so I got to say to our listeners, go Gators
Go
for the
Gators.
50% of you that are liking the Gators over the Seminoles. Why don't we talk about the Sun Sentinel being a thought leader? Why do you think that the Sun Sentinel is a thought leader in not only just in our region, but certainly beyond?
Yeah, of course. Starting out, we cover 3 of some of the largest counties in the state. Right. I mean, there are literally millions of people in Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade, right? And so we have the responsibility to cover news in that region, right? And we focus mostly on Broward and Palm Beach, but of course, there's a lot of stories that we do that have interest from West Palm all the way down to South is Homestead, right?
Yeah.
Whether that's weather, right? If there's a hurricane, whether that's a real estate trend. And so we have that responsibility to be informing our readers across this large region, right? And we really try to do that in a way that engages with what we know that readers are currently interested in. We are constantly analyzing what stories are doing well and what people seem to be interested in and maybe what they're not so interested in. And
Okay.
we allow that to guide the coverage going
Yeah.
forward. So we're constantly looking at that data and those analytics. And based on that, we form our coverage from there. And
Okay.
that helps us, I think, to be a leader in the news cycle, especially here in South Florida.
So when you're talking about that data and analytics, are you looking at the online viewership and readership? I guess obviously you can't tell what stories are trending and what's going well from the people who are getting the paper copies of the newspaper. So I assume that that's all coming from maybe social media feedback and actual clicks through the Sun Sentinel papers, I would assume, right?
Right. So we have active presence on Instagram and X, formerly Twitter, and we have a really great staff of people and individuals who are really keeping their finger on the pulse of what people are interested in, what they're commenting, what gets a lot of response. And then we have to think about, okay, why did this get so much response? Are people angry about it?
Yeah,
Are
right.
they happy about it? And
What do you do when you find out that somebody's really angry about something? You're getting horrible comments. Is that something that you tend to run with, or is that something that you sort of shy away from?
It depends on what it is, right? So I'll get emails sometimes with people expressing perhaps frustration about the content of a story,
Okay.
but it's more so just a reaction to what the story is about more so than at us, right?
Right,
We're
right.
just here, we're just the messengers,
Right.
right? Don't shoot the messenger.
Yeah.
So sometimes people just see that there's an avenue to express, and we encourage people to express, share their thoughts, whether that's a story idea, whether that's a thought about the coverage, because the reality is, I think journalists are more accessible than maybe people think that they are. And so we're always open to feedback and open to what people think. And of course, if that's positive, I actually keep a folder on my phone that's positive feedback. So
Okay.
if people send an email back saying, oh, I really liked this story because of such and such, or oh, this story was helpful because of such and such, I try to hold on to that because I don't, sometimes the news can be negative just
Right.
because of the state of the world and everything. And so it's good to focus on the positive. And so
Gives you a
we
little
encourage people
motivation.
to share. Yeah, yeah. And so we encourage people to share. And yeah, I would say it's just the content. And again, a lot of it's just a reflection of the world we live in, which can be hard sometimes, right?
I've often noticed when I'm reading articles online, which typically are real estate related,
Of course.
there's always that, the journalist's name is in blue. And if you click it, it's a little hyperlink that takes you directly to an email. And I thought to myself, who and why would actually click that and email the journalist directly? But I guess now we know there's people who are either praising you for the opinion or the information that you've given out. Or they're telling you how much they hate what you just wrote.
Or maybe they have a question. I've gotten
Okay.
emails where people have a question about something, or they, there was something recently, actually, I was writing a story about condos, and someone emailed me and said, hey, I read your article, and I actually am wondering how I can learn more about my condo. Do you have any advice?
Interesting.
And I was able to kind of direct him to where I thought maybe he could get that specific information. So sometimes people will read our stories and they might have a question like, hey, this applies to me, and now I'm actually curious about it. Could you help me? And so we definitely want to encourage people to reach out if they have questions about the coverage as well. Then maybe we can help.
Awesome. Okay, so from your perspective as a reporter and from conversations with residents, retailers, or even developers, is West Palm Beach working to redefine itself to be more like Broward County or Fort Lauderdale or the Miami area?
I would say no. I think that West Palm Beach area is trying to define itself as West Palm Beach, and the cities within that, right, are trying to maintain their own charm. And the reason I say that is because one of the things I hear the most often from people is that they want their city or their area of the county that they live in, particularly in Palm Beach, to stay separate, to stay distinctive from Broward and Miami-Dade. And that's because I think that developers and retailers and residents, they really like that South Florida is not uniform. It's not all the same. West Palm is different from Fort Lauderdale, and that's different from Miami. And that's actually what I think keeps so many people coming here, because there's just so many different hotspots and different aspects about each city. You know, people are constantly saying, I want this to retain the charm that attracted me to it in the first place, particularly in the Palm Beach County, West Palm area, and the cities within that, such as Boca Raton, Delray Beach, etc. And so I think especially for the people who have moved from Broward or Miami to Palm Beach, or even the people from the Northeast who came down here, right? So I think that West Palm is trying to define itself as West Palm. You know, maybe there's inspiration pulled, but I think each municipality is trying to maintain its own name so that there's something different about each one.
Yeah, I often hear people say something when they're referring to something that they see or a trend that they see. You know, somebody will say like, "Oh, that's so Boca," or "That is so West Palm." I happen to live in a waterfront city in Broward County, where people there are very used to it being a laid-back boating community. Everybody, you know, fishes and loves going to the beach. It's being developed very quickly, and a lot of the residents are pushing back, saying, "This is not what we signed up for. We don't want all this development coming to our town. We like being that quaint little fishing village." But it's South Florida, and everybody around the world wants to move to South Florida. So things are changing, whether you like it or not, in your own city. So I see that. I see where the charm aspects are for all of those different places that we have down here in South Florida, and everybody does have their own identity. But I do see that identity sort of being washed away as more and more people move here, and developers do see all the potential that there is for South Florida.
Right. And I think that you see a lot of that happening everywhere, of course, but especially in the East. You mentioned a waterfront community. The water is a huge draw, right? And I once did a real estate story where one of the people I interviewed said the true South Floridians live out west, right? Those are the people who aren't perhaps drawn to the opulence and the, you know, quite frankly, very expensive areas along the coast, but who maybe have families and just want to have good schools for their children and have a good, you know, steady job in the area. And so you kind of see that more in the West. Of course, there's still development out there, but it's just something to think about where a lot of people are drawn to that. But I think when people who have never been down here think of South Florida, they think of the beaches, they think of high rises and everything, which is a huge part of it, of course. But then, of course, there is those offerings for people who maybe just want a more modest, quieter suburban lifestyle out west as well.
Right. So I was going to ask you about general consumer sentiment about South Florida's growth. We touched on that a little bit, but do you think there's anything else that's really contributed to the growth of this region as opposed to the rest of Florida?
What I hear a lot from developers especially and real estate experts is that ever since COVID-19 pandemic, we had such a huge influx of people, especially in the northeastern part of the United States, flock down here in droves. And along with that, you had a lot of industries coming down here, finance industries, tech industries, etc.
And we see it on the roadways.
Exactly. And an example I can use is I wrote a story once about leasing activity in Boca, how you just had a lot of offices and businesses coming down to that city. And that's happening in a lot of cities across South Florida. And I think they're just attracted to, now that we're sort of out of the pandemic, right? We're coming back to where it was before, but people aren't leaving. They're staying. They're not going back. So
they got a taste of it. They're like, no, I'm not going back to the cold.
Of course I want to live 5 minutes from the beach. You know, this is awesome. So I think that's one of the biggest things that's lended itself to the growth, according to what so many people have spoke to us said.
Right. Well, we both experienced it on the way in today. It seems like it was almost like a hurricane evacuation going on this morning with everybody's driving north. And I did see a colorful array of out-of-state license plates heading back north. So it is springtime. Spring break is coming to an end, and it seems like everybody is now going back up north. That was only here temporarily, but we definitely do have a lot of northern converted license plates that now have the Florida oranges on them. According to FAU's College of Business, the Miami South Florida Metro ranks number 11 in the nation's top 100 housing markets. So in your opinion, how are consumers viewing this market currently with all the data that you're combing through?
It seems people think that it's very, very competitive, and it has been for a long time, and it's going to continue because even if rents are stabilizing, which they are, even if home prices hopefully start to stabilize a little bit and interest rates maybe start to stabilize, we'll see. Even if that happens, it's still going to be an incredibly competitive market because there's just so much interest, like we were talking about before. And with that, regardless of what you're looking for, even if it is something high rise right along the water or perhaps a suburban opportunity, depending on where you're at in life, it's going to be competitive. Right now, there are a little bit more options for people.
Right. Yeah. Inventory's up.
Right. And inventory is up for homes, which is good news for buyers. And same thing for renters, too. You might have a little bit more leeway with a landlord, perhaps, and more choices for a home. You don't have to buy immediately. You can maybe think about it for a little bit.
Sure.
And that's really good. But within that, competition is going to stay. So, and I think people know that. I don't think anybody moves to South Florida or chooses to buy a home or rent here and thinks it's going to be easy per se.
Right.
There's going to have to be,
They've heard the stories
yeah, some,
or read your
or,
story.
yeah, hopefully, some sort of investigation. And I can speak as someone who lives here. It takes a little bit of work to kind of get a deal, if you will, and then find something that works for you.
Okay. So we've seen South Florida continue to be obviously a premier destination for movers like we were just talking about. What sort of migration patterns have you been seeing lately, and how has that evolved in recent years?
I'm sure you've heard of this before, but one thing I hear a lot is this toothpaste tube-like growth from Miami to Palm Beach County. It's like, tube of toothpaste being squeezed.
Okay.
And so I've had developers and realtors use that before, where you see a lot of people eventually come up to Palm Beach, perhaps if they lived in Miami or even Broward for a while and they want a somewhat quieter, maybe more laid back environment. With that said, there's still a lot of people coming to and staying in Miami and Broward. It kind of just depends on where you're at. So that's something that I think we're going to continue seeing for a while. What will be interesting is if we get to a point where Palm Beach County then does kind of become a little bit too rowdy for people,
Right.
because so many people have moved up to. So it'll be interesting to see over the next few decades kind of how that plays out. But that's definitely a trend that I've seen and heard about quite a lot.
Okay. Are you South Florida native?
Yes.
You are a South Florida native. Okay. So we've got one final question for you. We ask this of all of our guests. We would like to know about your South Florida hidden gem. I always think it's special when we have somebody who's a native Floridian, that you've seen it all, you've been to it all. So why don't you tell us about your hidden gem, whether it be a local dive bar, beach spot, a park, restaurant, anything that you absolutely love about living in South Florida.
Of course. I think I'd have to say, I'm not sure how much of a hidden gem this is because I feel like people do use it a lot, but there is a natural preserve area called Pontoc in Boca, and it's right next to the Spanish River Library.
Okay.
And the Spanish River Library already is a very beautiful library. I love going in there. I'll do work there sometimes. I get all my library books from there, but it has this gorgeous trail that's a little over 2 miles in total that goes through a lot of beautiful scrub area. It has a lookout point. It's by a lake. And I just love going there. I'll go on a walk and then I'll check out a library book. And that's like a perfect after work activity. So I would say that is probably my favorite place. I love going there. So that would be my answer for sure.
Fantastic. Well, we haven't heard that one yet. I always like when we get something new. Well, Abigail, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for the good reporting that you're doing. And certainly, if you need any help with the most current data, reach out to our president, our CEO, and we'll make sure that you get everything that you need in order to do the reporting that you're doing.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
We will see you guys right back here next Friday, 8 a.m. on RWorld Talk.